My mother-in-law secretly opened 5 credit cards in my name and ruined our mortgage application. Then claimed I should be grateful for her help. I never thought I would be posting here, but after lurking for months, I need to get this off my chest and maybe get some advice from people who understand what it is like to deal with a JUSTNO mother-in-law. This has been the most stressful 6 months of my life, and I am still trying to process everything that has happened. It was a Tuesday afternoon in January when my phone rang. I was just finishing my shift at the hospital's I am an emergency room nurse, and I saw it was our mortgage broker, Kevin. My husband Mark and I had been house hunting for months, trying to find a 3-bedroom that would give our kids, Lily 8 and Noah's 5, their own rooms finally. We had found the perfect place. A craftsman with a fenced backyard in a good school district, and had put in an offer. "Hi Emily, do you have a minute?" Kevin's voice had that careful tone that immediately made my stomach clench. "Sure. What is up? Did something happen with our application?" There was a pause. "Well, I am looking at your credit report, and there are some discrepancies we need to discuss. According to this, you have 5 credit cards that were not listed on your application. They are all nearly maxed out with a combined balance of about 27,000. I felt like I had been punched. That is impossible. I only have 2 credit cards, and the balance is maybe 12,000 total between them. Well, these are definitely in your name. They are from Capital One, Discover, American Express, Chase, and Citibank. The oldest was opened about 3 years ago, the newest just 6 months back." My hands were shaking as I wrote down the details. Kevin explained that with this debt, our debt-to-income ratio was too high for the mortgage we had applied for. Our perfect house was slipping away, and I had no idea why. "I need to figure this out," I told him. "Can I call you back tomorrow?" After hanging up, I immediately pulled my full credit report. Sure enough, there they were, 5 credit cards I had never applied for, never received, never used, but someone had been using them. The statements showed purchases at high-end department stores, several expensive restaurants. And this detail made my blood run cold. A jewelry store in my mother-in-law Diane's hometown, 3 states away. I called Mark immediately, my voice shaking. "Someone has stolen my identity. There are credit cards in my name with almost 30,000 in debt." "What? How is that possible?" He sounded as shocked as I felt. "I do not know, but some of the purchases were made in your mom's town." There was a long silence. Then Mark said quietly, "Let me call you back." 20 minutes later, he called, "Emily, you need to sit down for this." According to Mark, he had called his mother to ask if she knew anything about this. Instead of denying it, she had immediately said, "Oh, those? I opened those for emergencies for the family. I was going to tell you both eventually, but I wanted to make sure they were established first." I could not speak. My mother-in-law had opened credit cards in my name, without asking, without telling me, and racked up $27,000 in debt. She says she has been making the minimum payments. Mark continued, his voice strained. "She says she was trying to help us by establishing more credit history. Her Mark, that is identity theft. That is a crime." My voice did not even sound like my own. I know. "She says she was going to transfer them to her name eventually, but wanted to help build our credit first." I laughed, a sharp, humorless sound. "Help build our credit. She has destroyed it. We are losing the house, Mark." The mortgage broker called because our application is being denied. The silence on the other end told me everything. Mark was caught between his wife and his mother, and he did not know what to do. "I am coming home," he finally said. "We will figure this out." But I already knew this was just the beginning of a nightmare. After hanging up with Mark, I sat in my car in the hospital parking lot, still in my scrubs, trying to process what I had just learned. The shock was wearing off, replaced by something else: determination. As an emergency room nurse, I had been trained to act quickly in crises, to assess situations and take immediate steps. This might not be a medical emergency, but it was certainly a crisis for our family. Instead of driving home, I pulled out my laptop and connected to the hospital's Wi-Fi. My hands were steadier now as I searched for information about identity theft and financial fraud. I spent the next hour reading about victims' rights, credit freezes, and fraud alerts. By the time Mark texted that he was almost home, I had compiled a list of immediate actions we needed to take. When I walked through our front door, I found Mark sitting at the kitchen table, looking lost. I set my bag down and placed my notebook in front of him. "I have been researching identity theft," I said, my voice calmer than I expected. "First thing tomorrow, we need to place fraud alerts with all 3 credit bureaus. Then we need to contact each credit card company to dispute the accounts." Mark looked up at me, surprised by my business-like tone. "You have been busy." "I am not going to let your mother destroy our financial future," I said. I also called Sarah from work. Her husband is a financial advisor. She says we should document everything and consider filing a police report. "A police report against my mother." Mark's voice rose in alarm. I sat down across from him. "I know it sounds extreme, but this is serious, Mark. What she did is a federal crime. We do not have to decide about that right now, but we need to understand our options." Mark ran his hands through his hair. "This is insane. I still cannot believe she would do this." "Well, she did," I said firmly. "And now we have to deal with it. I have already emailed Kevin to let him know what happened and ask if there is any way to salvage our mortgage application." For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt a small sense of control. I could not undo what Diane had done, but I could take steps to protect our family moving forward. 2 days later, we were sitting in Diane's immaculate living room. She had insisted we come to her rather than her visiting us, claiming she had all the paperwork at her house. Her sprawling 4-bedroom home in an exclusive neighborhood had always intimidated me, with its perfect furnishings that seemed to warn do not touch, do not disturb, do not belong. Before we left our apartment, I had prepared myself mentally. I had written down specific questions I wanted answered and points I needed to make. I had even rehearsed some responses with Mark, who seemed both impressed and slightly unnerved by my methodical approach. "I have never seen you like this," he had said as we drove to Diane's house. "You have never seen someone steal my identity before," I replied, checking my notes one more time. Diane sat across from us, perfectly coiffed at 65, not a silver hair out of place in her blonde bob. She wore a cashmere sweater and pearls, as if we were having a pleasant tea rather than confronting her about identity theft. "I just do not understand why you are so upset, Emily," she said, her voice dripping with false concern. "I was only trying to help your family." I took a deep breath, unfolding the paper I had brought. "Diane, I have some specific questions and I need honest answers. First, how did you get my social security number?" She seemed taken aback by my directness. The script she had prepared clearly did not start this way. "Well, that is hardly the point, is it?" She deflected. "Actually, it is exactly the point," I insisted, my voice steady. "You used my personal information without my consent. That is identity theft. It is illegal." A small, smug smile appeared on her face. "Remember when you and Mark were buying your car? You left all your paperwork at my house when you came for dinner. I just made copies. For safekeeping." I felt sick. That was 4 years ago, shortly after we were married. She had been planning this for years. "And the credit card statements," I continued, checking my list. "Where have those been going? They have not been coming to our address." "I had them sent to my post office box, of course," she said, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "I did not want to burden you with managing them." Mark finally spoke up. "Mom, this is serious. You cannot just open accounts in someone else's name." Diane turned to him, her expression immediately softening. "Marky, I was only thinking of you and the children. What if there had been a medical emergency? What if Emily lost her job? I was creating a safety net for my son and my grandchildren. By destroying my credit score, I could not keep the anger from my voice. We have lost the house we wanted because of this, Diane. Our mortgage application was denied because of the debt-to-income ratio these cards created. Do not be so dramatic, Emily. Your credit score was never that impressive to begin with. I remember when you and Mark first got together, you were still paying off those student loans." She said student loans like it was a moral failing. Mark shifted uncomfortably beside me. "Mom, that is not fair. Emily worked her way through nursing school. Had I admire that?" "I do," Diane said, not sounding admiring at all. "But let us be honest, financial responsibility has never been her strong suit. I was just trying to help." I felt my chest tighten. This was not just about the credit cards. This was about control, about Diane's narrative that I was not good enough for her son, that I needed her supervision. "The cards need to be paid off and closed immediately," I said firmly. "And we need a written statement from you admitting that you opened these accounts without my permission, so I can dispute them with the credit bureaust." Diane's smile vanished. "I most certainly will not put anything in writing. Do you have any idea how that could affect me? My reputation in the community. Do you have any idea how your actions have affected us?" I countered. "We have lost the house we wanted. Our credit is damaged. This will take years to fix." "Well," Diane said, standing up and smoothing her slacks, "I can see you are determined to be ungrateful. I suppose I could pay off the balances as a gift to Mark and the children. But I have conditions." Of course she did. Diane never gave anything without strings attached. "What conditions?" Mark asked, his voice wary. "First, I think you should reconsider where you are looking for houses. This neighborhood has several lovely properties available. You would be so much closer to me, and I could help with the children." I felt my heart sink. Diane's neighborhood was not only out of our price range, but the thought of living near her, having her drop by unannounced, having her constant presence in our lives, it was my worst nightmare. "Second," she continued, "would need a key to your new home for emergencies. And third, I think it is time we revisited the children's college accounts. I have been contributing to them, as you know, but I would feel more comfortable if my name remained on those accounts until they are of age." And there it was, the real agenda. Diane had been generously putting $500 a month into accounts for Lily and Noah's education, accounts that we could not access without her signature, accounts she controlled completely. She was using the credit card situation to tighten her grip on our finances, on our future, on our independence. Mark and I left without agreeing to anything, the tension between us palpable. In the car, he finally broke the silence. "I had no idea she would do something like this," he said, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. "Did not you?" I asked quietly. "She has been controlling our lives with money since we got married. The gift for the down payment on our first apartment that came with her having a key. The car she helped us buy that she insists on borrowing whenever she wants. The vacations she plans and pays for, where we have to follow her schedule." Mark was silent for a long moment. "I know she can be difficult, but she is my mother, Emily, and she has helped us financially." "At what cost, Mark? At what cost?" That night, after we had put the kids to bed, I found Mark sitting alone in the dark on our small balcony. He had a photo album open on his lap, one I had not seen before. When I sat beside him, I saw it contained pictures from his childhood. "I found this when I was looking for our mortgage documents," he said quietly. I had forgotten I still had it. He pointed to a photo of himself at about 10 years old, standing next to a science fair project. "I won first place with this," he said. "I wanted to be an astronomer back then. I was obsessed with space, had telescopes, star charts, the works." I smiled, trying to picture a young Mark gazing at the stars. "What happened to that dream?" His expression darkened. "Mom happened. She told me astronomy was not a practical career. She had already decided I would be an engineer like her father." He turned the page to a photo of himself in college, looking stiff in a formal portrait. She paid for my engineering degree, but made it clear that her financial support was contingent on me studying what she approved of. I did not know that, I said softly. I have never really talked about it, he admitted. It was easier to just go along with what she wanted. She always made it seem like she knew best, like her financial support was this great gift that I should be grateful for. He closed the album slowly. Sound familiar? I took his hand. Mark, what your mother did with these credit cards, it is part of a pattern. I am starting to see that, he said. When you pointed out all those times she has used money to control us, it got me thinking about my whole life with her. He looked at me, his expression troubled. I called Rachel tonight. Rachel was Mark's older sister who lived on the West Coast. We had always been friendly but not particularly close. She visited only occasionally and I had always assumed it was because of the distance. What did she say? I asked. A lot, Mark said, his voice strained. Apparently, Mom pulled similar stunts with her. When Rachel wanted to go to art school instead of business school, Mom threatened to cut her off financially. When Rachel got engaged to David, Mom tried to control their wedding by holding the purse strings. When they bought their first house, he trailed off, shaking his head. What about their house? I prompted. Mom gave them money for renovations, then demanded they redo everything when they did not consult her on the design choices. When they refused, she demanded the money back. Rachel and David ended up taking out a loan to repay her rather than live under her control. I squeezed his hand. That sounds familiar? Rachel says that is why she moved across the country, to get away from Mom's influence. She said she has been waiting for years for me to wake up and smell the manipulation. He gave a humorless laugh. Those were her exact words. How do you feel about all this? I asked carefully. Mark was quiet for a long moment, confused, angry, sad. He looked at me, his eyes reflecting the dim light from our apartment. And guilty. I have been making excuses for her behavior for so long, telling myself she was just being generous, just looking out for me. For us. But what she did with these credit cards crossed a line I cannot ignore. It was the first time since this nightmare began that I felt Mark was truly seeing his mother's actions clearly. Not making excuses, not caught in the middle, but actually seeing the manipulation for what it was. What do we do now? I asked. I do not know exactly, he said. But I do know we need to start setting some serious boundaries with her. And I need to be the one to do it. He took a deep breath. I am sorry, Emily. I should have done this a long time ago. As we sat there in the darkness, I felt something shift between us, a new understanding, a united front forming. We still had a financial mess to clean up, but for the first time, I felt like we were truly in it together. Over the next few weeks, I started to see Diane's manipulation with painful clarity. It was not just the credit cards. It was a pattern that had been established long before I came into the picture. Mark's sister Rachel called me out of the blue one evening. After his conversation with her, she had decided to reach out directly. I am so sorry you are going through this, she said. But I am not surprised. Over the course of a 2-hour conversation, Rachel revealed more details about Diane's controlling behavior. When Rachel wanted to attend art school instead of the business program Diane preferred, Diane had withdrawn financial support. When Rachel had gotten engaged to her now husband, Diane had offered to pay for the wedding, but only if she could approve the guest list, venue, and even Rachel's dress. When Rachel and her husband bought their first home, Diane had given them a gift that she later demanded be repaid when they did not consult her on renovations. She uses money as a leash, Rachel said, and the more you pull away, the tighter she pulls back. The conversation with Rachel was like having a light switched on in a dark room. Suddenly I could see all the furniture I had been stumbling over for years. There was the time Diane had given us $5,000 for whatever we needed. When Noah was born, only to suggest 2 weeks later that we use it for a professional family photo shoot, which she arranged, selected the outfits for, and where she was prominently featured in most of the photos. There was the generous offer to pay for preschool for both kids, but only the preschool she selected, which was 30 minutes from our home but 5 minutes from hers, ensuring we would have to drop the kids at her house most mornings. There were the Christmas and birthday gifts that always seemed extravagant, until you realized they came with obligations. The stand mixer that meant I was now expected to bake for all family gatherings. The expensive clothes for the children that I was criticized for not keeping pristine. The jewelry for me that Diane would ask to borrow whenever we attended events together. And always there were the comments. The little digs about my salary, about our modest home, about how lucky I was that Mark had family money to fall back on. You know what the worst part is? Rachel said before we hung up. She genuinely believes she's being generous. She cannot see that what she is doing is harmful. That night, I could not sleep. I kept thinking about all the ways Diane had inserted herself into our financial lives, all the decisions that had been influenced by her generosity. And I realized with a sinking feeling that the credit cards were just a symptom of a much deeper problem. The next morning, I called the credit card companies. Since the accounts were in my name, they would only speak to me. A small mercy. I explained the situation, that the cards had been fraudulently opened. They were sympathetic but clear. Without a police report, they could not do much. Are you planning to press charges against the person who did this? One representative asked. Could I file a police report against my children's grandmother? What would that do to our family? I told the representative I needed to think about it and hung up. When I raised the possibility with Mark that evening, his face went pale. You want to have my mother arrested? He asked incredulously. I do not want to have anyone arrested, I said. But I need these accounts off my credit report, and the companies are saying they need a police report. There has to be another way, Mark insisted. Mom said she would pay them off, with conditions attached. Conditions that would give her even more control over our lives. We went around in circles, neither willing to budge. Finally, exhausted, I said, Mark, do you understand that what your mother did was wrong? Not just morally wrong, but legally wrong. He ran his hands through his hair, a gesture I had seen 1,000 times when he was stressed. Yes, I know it was wrong. But she is family, Emily. We do not call the police on family. Then what do we do? Because this cannot continue. Mark did not have an answer. The next day, I received a text from Diane. I have been hearing that you are telling people I stole your identity. I am deeply hurt that you would spread such lies about me when I was only trying to help your family. Perhaps we should discuss this with the whole family so everyone can understand the truth. My stomach dropped. Diane was going on the offensive, trying to control the narrative. And sure enough, by that evening, I had received concerned calls from Mark's aunt and uncle, asking if everything was okay, saying that Diane had told them I was having some financial difficulties, and blaming others for my problems. The gaslighting had begun. The following week, Mark came home from work looking troubled. As an engineering project manager, he typically handled complex technical problems with ease, but lately, the stress of our situation with Diane had been affecting his concentration. Everything okay? I asked as he set down his laptop bag. He hesitated. We had a situation at work today that, well, it made me think about everything that is happening with Mom. What kind of situation? I asked, curious. One of our clients discovered that a trusted employee had been manipulating financial records. He explained, sitting heavily on the couch. Not embezzling exactly, but moving funds between accounts without authorization, making decisions they were not entitled to make. I sat beside him. What happened? The company owner was reluctant to take action at first. The employee was his brother-in-law, someone who had been with the company for 20 years. Mark stared at his hands. Our legal team had to explain that regardless of the relationship, what had happened was fraud. That ignoring it could make the company complicit. I waited, sensing there was more. During the meeting, our corporate counsel said something that really hit me. She said, the people who take advantage of your trust are counting on your reluctance to hold them accountable. That is how they get away with it. He looked up at me, his expression pained. I could not stop thinking about Mom. That is pretty relevant to our situation, I said carefully. Yeah. Mark was quiet for a moment. The company ended up filing a police report, not to press charges necessarily, but to formally document what happened and protect themselves legally. He took a deep breath. It got me thinking that maybe we need to do the same. I tried to hide my surprise. This was a significant shift from Mark's previous position. What changed your mind? I asked. Listening to the lawyers talk about fiduciary responsibility, breach of trust, the legal implications, it suddenly felt less personal. You know, like, this is not just about my feelings toward my mother. It is about protecting our family from financial harm. He looked at me earnestly. I have been trying to have it both ways, acknowledging what she did was wrong while avoiding any real consequences for her. But that is not fair to you or to the kids. I took his hand. This is a big shift, Mark. I know, and I am still struggling with it. But seeing a similar situation play out professionally helped me separate the emotional aspect from the practical reality. He squeezed my hand. Mom committed fraud. Whether she meant well or not does not change that fact. That evening, we researched our options together. We learned that filing a police report did not necessarily mean Diane would be arrested or charged. It was simply a formal documentation of the fraud that would help us dispute the accounts with the credit bureaus and credit card companies. Let us sleep on it, I suggested, not wanting to push Mark while his perspective was still evolving. Okay. He'd agreed. But I want you to know I am starting to see things more clearly. And I am sorry it has taken me so long. Whoopie dating? Thank you all for the supportive comments on my original post. So many of you asked for an update, and unfortunately, things have gotten worse before they have gotten better. Here is what has happened in the last few weeks. 3 weeks after our confrontation at Diane's house, I was in the middle of a busy shift at the emergency room when one of the receptionists called back to me. Emily, there is someone here insisting on seeing you. Says she is your mother-in-law and it is an emergency about your children. My heart nearly stopped. Had something happened to Lily and Noah? They were at school. Had there been an accident? I rushed to the front, only to find Diane standing there perfectly composed, holding a manila envelope. What happened? Are the kids okay? I demanded. Diane looked confused for a moment, then understanding dawned. Oh, the children are fine. I needed to talk to you about these. She held up the envelope. Relief was quickly replaced by anger. You came to my workplace and claimed there was an emergency with my children? Well, I knew you would not take my calls, and this is an emergency of sorts. She glanced around the busy waiting room. Is there somewhere private we can talk? I was acutely aware of my colleagues watching, of patients waiting, of the absolute inappropriateness of this situation. I am working, Diane. I cannot do this right now. This will only take a minute, she insisted, opening the envelope and pulling out papers. I have paid off all the credit cards as I promised. Here are the statements showing zero balances. Now we need to discuss the conditions we agreed upon. We did not agree to any conditions, I said, trying to keep my voice low. And this is completely inappropriate. You need to leave. I have already spoken with a realtor about houses in my neighborhood, she continued as if I had not spoken. And I have found several that would be perfect for you. I have scheduled viewings for this weekend. Diane, stop. We are not doing this here. You need to leave, now. She raised her voice slightly. I do not understand why you are being so difficult about this. After everything I have done for you and Mark, After I have just paid off nearly $30,000 of debt. Debt that you created in my name without my permission. I interrupted. Several people in the waiting room were openly staring now. Is everything okay here? Dr. Patel, one of the attending physicians, had approached, her expression concerned. No, it is not, Diane said before I could respond. My daughter-in-law has been stealing from me, and now she is refusing to honor our agreement. The room seemed to spin. I could not believe she was saying this, here in my workplace in front of my colleagues and patients. That is not true, I managed to say. Dr. Patel, I am sorry about this. This is a personal matter that my mother-in-law has inappropriately brought to my workplace. She opened credit cards in my name without my permission, maxed them out, and now she is trying to claim I stole from her. I added, my voice shaking. Dr. Patel looked between us, clearly trying to assess the situation. Mom, she said to Diane, I am going to have to ask you to leave. This is a hospital, and we cannot have personal disputes disrupting patient care. Fine, Diane snapped, shoving the papers back into the envelope. But this is not over, Emily. Mark will be hearing about this. After she left, Dr. Patel gently suggested I take a break. In the staff lounge, the full impact of what had just happened hit me. My hands started shaking uncontrollably. My chest felt tight. I could not catch my breath. One of the nurses found me there, hyperventilating, and recognized what was happening immediately. You are having a panic attack, she said, sitting beside me. Try to breathe with me. In for 4, hold for 4, out for 4. It took nearly 20 minutes for me to calm down enough to explain what had happened. By then, Dr. Patel had joined us, and after hearing the full story, she insisted I take the rest of the day off. This is a serious situation, Emily, she said. What your mother-in-law is doing is not just inappropriate, it is abusive. It was the first time anyone had used that word, abusive, and it hit me like a physical blow. Was this abuse? The financial control, the manipulation, the public humiliation. I called Mark on my way home, still shaking. When I told him what had happened, there was a long silence. Mark, are you there? She called me right after she left the hospital, he finally said. She told me you had made a scene at work, that you had embarrassed her in front of everyone. She is lying, Mark. She showed up claiming there was an emergency with our children, then tried to force me to agree to her conditions for paying off the credit cards she fraudulently opened. Another silence. Then, she also said she has been diagnosed with early-stage breast cancer. That is why she is so insistent on us moving closer. She is going to need help during treatment. I nearly drove off the road. What? When was she diagnosed? She just got the results yesterday, apparently. She was going to tell us this weekend, but after what happened at the hospital. My mind was racing. Diane had never mentioned any health concerns. She had just had her annual physical 2 months ago and had been bragging about how her doctor said she was in perfect health for her age. Has she shown you any medical records? Any doctor's notes? I asked, thinking of our recent conversations about documentation and evidence. Emily, for God's sake, she just told me she has cancer. No, I did not ask to see her medical records. I took a deep breath. I am sorry, that was insensitive. Of course, if she is sick, we will help however we can. But that does not change what she did with the credit cards, or how she behaved at the hospital today. She says she is sorry about the hospital, Mark said. She was just upset and not thinking clearly. And with this diagnosis, I could hear it in his voice. He was wavering. The credit card fraud, the manipulation, the lies. All of it was being overshadowed by this new development. Mark, we need to talk about this in person. I am on my way home now. When I got home, Mark was not there. He had gone to his mother's house to discuss her treatment options. I sat alone in our living room, trying to make sense of everything that had happened. Was Diane really sick? Or was this another manipulation tactic, perfectly timed to deflect from her actions? I did not know what to believe anymore, but I did know one thing. Something had to change. I could not continue living like this, constantly at the mercy of Diane's manipulations, watching my husband torn between loyalty to his mother and support for his wife. That night, I made 2 appointments, one with a financial advisor and one with a therapist. It was time to get some professional help. When Mark finally came home that evening, his expression was unreadable. He sat heavily on the couch beside me, silent for a long moment. How is your mom? I asked cautiously. I do not know, he said, his voice flat. Because I do not think she has cancer? I blinked in surprise. What makes you say that? When I got to her house, I asked her which oncologist she was seeing. She got flustered, said she could not remember the name. I asked which hospital. She said she was not sure yet, that her primary care doctor was handling the referrals. He looked at me, his eyes troubled. So I asked if I could speak to her primary doctor to better understand her diagnosis and treatment options. She refused? That seems odd, I said carefully. Gets worse, Mark continued. I asked to see her diagnosis paperwork, any lab results, imaging reports, anything. She claimed everything was electronic these days, and she did not have paper copies. When I suggested we log into her patient portal together, she suddenly remembered she had a bridge club meeting and practically pushed me out the door. I sat back, processing this. You think she is lying about having cancer? Mark ran his hands over his face. I called her primary doctor's office. I know it is a privacy violation, but I was worried. I did not ask for details, just whether my mother had been in recently for any tests or had received any concerning diagnosis. The receptionist, who knows our family, hesitated and then said she should not be worried about any cancer diagnosis at this time. He looked at me, his expression a mixture of anger and pain. She is lying, Emily. My mother is lying about having cancer to manipulate us. I reached for his hand, not knowing what to say. This was a new low even for Diane. I drove around for hours after that. Mark continued. Just thinking about everything. The credit cards, the way she has always used money to control us. And now this. He squeezed my hand. I am done. I am just done? What does that mean? I asked quietly. It means I am ready to file that police report about the credit cards. It means I am ready to set some real boundaries with her. And it means I am sorry. So incredibly sorry that I have let this go on for so long. I felt tears welling up. After weeks of feeling alone in this fight, Mark was finally fully on my side. There is something else, he said. When I was at Mom's house, Lily called me. She was upset. About what? I asked, immediately concerned. She said Grandma had been telling her that we might be moving to a new house near her soon. That Lily might even be able to stay with Grandma sometimes while we got settled. Mark's jaw tightened. Mom's been talking to our daughter about taking her to live with her, Emily. Without our knowledge or permission. I felt a chill run through me. That's crossing a line. It's crossing every line, Mark said firmly. And it stops now. The next morning, we went together to the police station to file a report about the credit cards. The officer who took our statement was professional and non-judgmental, explaining that identity theft within families was unfortunately common. He assured us that filing the report didn't necessarily mean Diane would be arrested. It was primarily documentation that would help us dispute the fraudulent accounts with the credit bureaus. Though I should warn you, he added, once this report is filed, it's out of your hands whether charges are pursued. That will be up to the district attorney's office. Mark nodded. We understand. As we left the police station, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. For the first time in weeks, we were taking concrete action rather than just reacting to Diane's manipulations. What now? I asked as we got into the car. Now we go see Mom, Mark said, his voice steady. Together. Diane opened her front door with a smile that quickly faded when she saw both of us standing there. She was dressed impeccably as always. No sign of any illness or distress. Mark, Emily, she said, her tone cautious. I wasn't expecting you both. We need to talk, Mom, Mark said firmly. May we come in? She hesitated, then stepped aside. We followed her into the living room, but neither of us sat when she gestured to the sofa. Mom, we know you lied about having cancer, Mark said without preamble. Diane's expression flickered, surprise, then indignation. How dare you accuse me of such a thing? Of course I'm sick. I just didn't want to worry you with all the details. I spoke with your doctor's office. Mark continued, his voice steady despite the slight tremor I could see in his hands. They confirmed you haven't been diagnosed with cancer. Well, they shouldn't be discussing my medical information with anyone. That's a violation of my privacy. Diane's voice rose, her strategy shifting from denial to outrage. Mom, stop. Mark's voice was quiet but firm. Just stop. No more lies. No more manipulation. I watched as he took a deep breath, steeling himself for what came next. I'd seen him rehearsing these words earlier that morning, pacing our small kitchen, determined to get this right. We've filed a police report about the credit cards, he said. Diane's face went pale. You what? You committed identity theft, Mom. That's a crime. We've filed a report so Emily can dispute the accounts and repair her credit. How could you do this to me? Diane whispered, tears welling in her eyes. Your own mother. After everything I've done for you. I could see Mark wavering slightly at her tears. This was the woman who had raised him, after all. But then he squared his shoulders. This isn't something I'm doing to you, Mom. This is something you did to us, to Emily, to our family. His voice grew stronger with each word. You violated our trust. You damaged our financial future. You lied about having a life-threatening illness. And you tried to manipulate our daughter. Diane turned to me, her expression hardening. This is your doing, isn't it? You've turned my son against me. Before I could respond, Mark stepped between us. No, Mom. This is your doing. Emily has been remarkably patient and forgiving, considering what you've put her through. We're setting boundaries, I said, finding my voice. From now on, you will not make financial decisions for our family. You will not discuss moving or living arrangements with our children. You will not show up at my workplace. And if you want to continue having a relationship with us, with your grandchildren, you'll need to respect these boundaries, Mark added. Diane looked between us, seemingly realizing for the first time that we were truly united. Her tears dried up instantly. I see, she said coldly. Well, if that's how you feel, perhaps I should reconsider my own financial decisions. The college accounts for the children, for instance. And of course, the help I was planning to provide for your down payment on a new house. There it was, the financial leverage, the threat of withdrawal. It had worked so many times before, but not this time. That's your choice, Mark said, his voice steady despite the emotional turmoil I knew he was feeling. But our boundaries aren't negotiable. We'd like to keep you in our lives, Diane, I added, trying to extend an olive branch. But it has to be a healthy relationship based on mutual respect. Diane laughed, a bitter sound. Respect. You file a police report against me and call that respect. She turned to Mark. When you come to your senses and realize what you're throwing away, you know where to find me. With that, she walked to the front door and held it open, clearly dismissing us. As we drove home, Mark was quiet, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. I knew he was processing the enormity of what had just happened, the potential fracturing of his relationship with his mother. Are you okay? I asked softly. He considered the question for a long moment. No, he finally said. But I will be. We will be. When we got home, we found Lily and Noah playing in the living room with our neighbor's teenage daughter, who had been watching them. Lily ran to us, throwing her arms around Mark's legs. Daddy, did you know we're getting a new house near Grandma? She said I might even get to live with her sometimes. Mark knelt down to her level, his expression gentle. Lily, we're not moving near Grandma, and you'll always live with Mommy and me and Noah. Grandma shouldn't have told you that. Lily's face fell. but she said it was a special secret plan. Mark and I exchanged a look over her head. This was exactly the kind of manipulation we were trying to protect our children from. Honey, I said, joining them on the floor. Families don't keep secrets from each other. Not big secrets like that. Is Grandma in trouble? Noah asked, always perceptive despite his young age. Mark hesitated. Grandma made some mistakes, he said carefully. And now we're all figuring out how to fix things. But you don't need to worry about that, okay? That night, after the kids were asleep, Mark and I sat on our small balcony, looking out at the city lights. What do we do now? I asked. We move forward, he said simply. We find a house we can afford without my mother's help. We rebuild your credit. We focus on our family, you, me, and the kids. I leaned my head on his shoulder. It won't be easy. No, he agreed, but it will be worth it. UPDAE 6 months later. First, thank you to everyone who commented on my previous post with support and advice. Your insights helped more than you know during one of the most difficult periods of our lives. It's been 6 months since we confronted Diane and filed the police report. A lot has happened, and I wanted to share an update for those who have been following our story. The good news first, with the police report, I was able to dispute all 5 credit cards with the credit bureaus. It took multiple phone calls, lots of paperwork, and several months, but all the accounts have been removed from my credit report. My score has started to recover, though it's still not where it was before all this happened. We didn't end up getting that house we originally wanted, but in some ways, that's been a blessing in disguise. We found a smaller but charming 3-bedroom in a different neighborhood. The commute is actually better for both of us, and the kids' new school has an excellent arts program that Lily is thriving in. The financial advisor I mentioned in my last post has been incredibly helpful. She's helped us create a budget that works without any assistance from Diane, and we've started our own college savings accounts for the kids that are completely under our control. As for Diane, that's more complicated. The district attorney decided not to press charges, given her age and lack of prior offenses. I have mixed feelings about this, but Mark and I had already decided that our goal wasn't to see her punished. It was to protect ourselves and set clear boundaries. We haven't cut contact completely, but our interactions are limited and strictly on our terms. Diane is only allowed to see the children with both Mark and me present. No more solo visits, no more overnight stays at Grandma's house, no more lavish gifts that come with strings attached. She's not happy about these boundaries, of course. There have been tearful phone calls, guilt trips, even a few flying monkeys in the form of extended family members calling to tell us how heartbroken she is. But Mark has been remarkably firm. I'm so proud of him for maintaining these boundaries despite the emotional toll. The most surprising development has been with Mark's sister, Rachel. After our confrontation with Diane, Rachel flew out to visit us. It was the first time she'd been to see us in years, and the first time she'd really connected with her niece and nephew. She explained that she'd kept her distance because being around Diane was too triggering for her. But now that we were setting boundaries, she felt safe reconnecting with our part of the family. Rachel has become an unexpected source of support and validation. She's shared stories about growing up with Diane that have helped Mark process his own childhood experiences. And she's been a wonderful aunt to Lily and Noah even from a distance. As for Mark and me, our relationship is stronger than ever. Going through this together, as difficult as it was, showed us both what we're made of. We've started seeing a family therapist to work through the residual effects of Diane's influence on our marriage, and it's been incredibly helpful. The kids are adjusting well. They ask about Grandma sometimes, but they seem to understand in their own way that the new arrangement is healthier. Lily has stopped having the nightmares she was experiencing during the height of the conflict. It hasn't all been smooth sailing. There have been moments of doubt, times when we've questioned whether we're doing the right thing. Financial stress is real. We're making it work, but without Diane's help, things are tighter than they used to be, and navigating family gatherings with extended family who don't fully understand the situation has been awkward. But despite these challenges, I can honestly say we're happier and healthier than we've been in years. There's a lightness in our home that wasn't there before, a sense that we're making our own lives free from manipulation and control. If there's one thing I've learned from all this, it's that financial abuse is real, and it can come from the people you least expect. But I've also learned that it's never too late to set boundaries, to stand up for yourself, and to create the family dynamic you want and deserve. Thank you again for all your support. It made a world of difference knowing we weren't alone.